Welcome this morning. I'm glad that you made it here. This session is Traditions of Living with the Land and the Sea, Archaeological, Ethnographic, and Oral Historical Studies of Place. And I'm Madonna Moss, and I'm from the University of Oregon. And my tribe just got one out of the Sweet 16 last night, so I'm very happy. They're going to the Elite Eight. Okay, that's the Oregon Ducks. And but the first talk this morning is by Dan Monteith of the University of Alaska Southeast. Where's your title, Dan? Here it is. Tlingit Oral Narratives and Time Immemorial.
Okay, I'd like to thank the organizing committee and the clan conference for all their work in including me in this meeting. I would like to thank Sitka and the Sitka clans for being the hosts and for on whose lands we meet today. Yache Wustini Tlingit Chadnegi, Danik Yukat Dwasak, Huts Nakatsiti, Tekwedi Ayakat, Saxmank Yekat Yati, Sanya Kwan Ayakat, Aktuasigu Gunesh Chish, Tlingit Chadnegi, Gunesh Chish, Dekinau Chadnegi, Aktuasigu Gunesh Chish, Gunana Chadnegi. I would also like to thank and acknowledge some of the young people and my students who are here at the conference and who carry on the future of the Tlingit people. Hans Chester, Jessica Chester, Mary Folletti, Marsha Hotch, Vivian Mork, Elizabeth Kunibe, Michelle Martin, Lisle James, Melinda Hernandez, no longer a student, but always a student at heart, and Theodore Kasida. I'm so very proud of you guys, and know you'll keep up the good work and dedication. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge my opposites, the Ravens, particularly my wife's clan, the Dokdeen Ton. She and her clan have been very patient and supportive of me in countless ways. In the last bit here, as I've been very overloaded with many tasks, including preparing for this conference. I'd also like to acknowledge, although they're not here right now in the room, Huts Hin Ka, Sam Samuels, Willie Jackson, Chuck Denny, Irene Dundas, Jim Hoff, and George Ridley, the Tontaquan and Sonia Kwan, for where I was first adopted. As most of the people know attending this conference already know, Tlingit oral narratives and history are an important part of each clan's identity in at.oow. Each clan's history is unique and establishes links to the land and their people. The knowledge and understanding of these histories has been passed on from generation to generation, as elders would say, since time immemorial. Countless Tlingit elders and speakers have used the words time immemorial when speaking about the presence and history of the Tlingit people in Southeast Alaska. Despite the elders' declarations, some archaeologists who have done work in the region have been some of the foremost to diminish these claims. In this presentation, I will explore how archaeology and geology collaborates with the Tlingit oral narratives and histories in Glacier Bay. And then I will examine what I call the deep history of the clans and discuss the possible antiquity of the Tlingit oral narratives. As a professor and teacher of young people, both native and non-native at the University of Alaska Southeast in Juneau, I tell my students we will not use the words myths, legends, and folk tales when referring to Tlingit narratives. I tell them we will refer to these stories and use the more appropriate and precise terms of oral narratives and histories. When one looks at Tlingit narratives, they are not compartmentalized like Euro-American literature. Tlingit narratives have histories, dream time, epic, and spiritual encounters, and much more, all wrapped into one genre, which should be called Tlingit histories and narratives. These histories and narratives, I believe, describe natural historical events and clan migrations that go back as far as what geologists call the end of the Pleistocene and beginning of the Holocene, or 10,000 years ago. Therefore, using words like myths, legends, folk tales to describe the narrative belittles the importance and validity of these traditions. As we have heard in the session on Thursday afternoon, Ken Austin and Ken Grant discussed the importance of Glacier Bay to the clans of the Huna. He talked about how the Huna traced their history and origins to places in and around Glacier Bay. Many of the clan crests are symbolic representations of places or events from Glacier Bay. These histories and clan crests also have songs, personal names, and place names that reinforce the memory, emotions, and legal claims to these locations. On Thursday, Ken Austin recited some of the history and talked about some of the songs. Therefore, it is not my intention to reiterate, nor is it my place to repeat what Ken Austin has already done so well. But my hope is to reinforce these histories and uplift their histories and at.oow by showing how geology validates their claims. Glacier Bay, located in the northern part of southeast Alaska, has one of the most dynamic glacial histories of the region and has been documented by Tlingit oral histories, explorers, and scientists. Since the end of the Pleistocene and beginning of the Holocene, 10,000 years ago, the glaciers in Glacier Bay have had 2 major retreats and 1 advance. During the past 4 years, both native and non-native students from the University of Alaska Southeast Juneau have been involved in both ethnographic interviews in Huna and geoarchaeological work in Glacier Bay. Some Tlingit students who were born and raised in Huna worked with me to conduct some interviews of the elders. The ethnographic work was complemented with geoarchaeological work done in the bay proper. During the past few summers, an interdisciplinary team of archaeologists and geologists, including Kathy Connor, Greg Strebler, Wayne Powell, and myself, with several students from UAS, have been collecting soil samples, organics, and rooted interstadial stumps to analyze and radiocarbon date these samples. These samples were collected in order to develop a better chronology for the advance of the glacier in the lower southern portion of the bay during the Little Ice Age. This work has also been done in conjunction with the Huna Heritage, Huna Indian Association, UAS, and the National Park Service to develop documentation for what will be in the future several traditional cultural property nominations, work that Ken Grant, I'm sure, will elaborate on in a few minutes. Since the end of the Pleistocene and beginning of the Holocene 10,000 years ago, the glaciers in Glacier Bay have made 2 major retreats and 1 advance. Approximately 4,000 years ago, with the onset of the Little Ice Age, the network of glaciers advanced and formed one large system that pushed out to icy straits, arriving at its maximum point by the early 1700s. The clans of the Huna have oral histories, regalia, and songs that depict an event in which the glacier comes and wipes out the village near the end of the Little Ice Age, the story that Ken Austin was telling the other day. Since 1794 and Vancouver's voyage to southeast Alaska, the Grand Pacific Glacier has retreated approximately 65 miles. An interesting ethno-historical and geological question was, when did the Huna village get obliterated by the advancing glacier? Now this is where I get to show about 7 slides that represents 10,000 years of history, Tlingit oral history, 4 years of geological work, in about 2 minutes or a minute or so. So when we look at Glacier Bay through our geological investigations, 14,000 years ago, this is what it would have looked like. Much more a saltwater fjord-like environment. Then we quickly move up to 5,000 years ago, and you can see that Glacier Bay is transforming. You have the glacier beginning to advance. In front of the glacier, there's a terrestrial environment rather than a fjord-like environment. There we are at 2,500 years ago, setting the stage for the epic story there. Here we are at 1,500 years ago, and definitely things are set in place for Shashakian and the Huna narrative. Here we go 500 years ago. The glacier had advanced farther down. We're now almost to the Beardsley Islands, and again you can see the terrestrial environment in front of it, placing the perfect setting for Shashakian. The Tlingit place names were a huge help in a lot of the work of Tom Thornton and the elders of Huna and Yakutat. Really helped us understand better what the ancient landscape looked like. Of course, when the glacier came, it obliterated everything. As it retreated, the area turned into a saltwater fjord. Thus, we have nothing left except the Tlingit oral histories and place names to give us clues about what Glacier Bay looked like prior to that advance. 250 years ago, of course, this is after the Costine Shawatsik story. Just prior to the time of Vancouver coming through and charting in the glacier. And then today. And there you see a lot of those fuzzy little places. Sorry, it's pixelated, but those are many of the places where we collected samples to understand the advance of the glacier and some of the work done by previous geologists. So maybe I'll just go through it real quick, just like an eye doctor, so you can see it. As it gets down to this point, it would be a surging glacier, just like the Tlingit oral narratives tell about. And then, of course, after they had to make their exodus, and then back to today. Now we are more confident that this Huna oral history is at least 400 years old. This makes it an oral history that exceeds the limit of what many anthropologists would have said is possible with respect to the age of oral histories and oral transmission of knowledge. This research places the narrative in geological time, of course, well before many things happening in the formation of the United States. When I've been asked by other scholars, academics, scientists, how could the Tlingit oral narratives and history have survived for this time period, I try to explain the precision and repetition of these narratives at kuiks. At public events, especially kuiks or potlatches, the host clan will bring out their atu or crest, just as we saw last night. When these crests or regalia are brought out, the histories are told and the names are recited. Then the songs are sung, thus reinforcing the memory and claim to these places. The clan's presentation of their history is presided over by the Nakani from the opposite moiety. The presentation of the Atu is witnessed by the opposite moiety, who are guests at the kuik. The guests are both the living witnesses of the history and help perpetuate the memory of the kuik and clan history. I tell many of these skeptical scholars that these formal performances of clan oral histories and verification of Atu by the guest is still widely practiced, of course, today in Southeast Alaska. And most of us here have witnessed this transmission of oral histories many times. Therefore, this is how the Huna clans document and acknowledge their claims and connections to Glacier Bay. It is my hope that our archaeological work will prove to most hardened scientists the antiquity of Tlingit oral narratives and histories. There is a deeper history for the Tlingit oral narratives and histories. Many of these narratives were labeled flood stories by many of the early missionaries, ethnographers who recorded these histories. And I quote here from Emmons, "As a common starting point for clan histories, the Tlingit elders usually tell a story about a period a long time ago when there was but one group of people in southeast Alaska. These people all spoke the same language and lived in harmony. During this time, there were no clans, different tribes, or different languages. Then a catastrophic event. Some elders state a natural catastrophe such as a flood, others say a great war, some say both occurred. It was after the time of the flood that the Tlingit clans developed their distinct histories. There are many recorded versions of the Tlingit story of the flood. Each clan has their narratives about the events before, during, and after the flood. I'm going to read a few excerpts from one of these oral histories recorded by Lynn Forrest, recited by Charlie Brown, recorded in the 1930s in Ketchikan. Keep in mind, this is long before geologists realized there was isostatic rebound and sea level change and so many other things. And here I quote from the story. "My story is told me, and which has been handed down even until now, is about the trouble caused by the flood. And so the tide began to rise, each day coming a little higher, but failing to go back down to its original low tide mark. Seeing this, the people realized there was a flood. Soon their houses were flooded, and they were forced to get into their canoes. I'm sure there was a great deal of trouble and self-protection, for the story is told it was only those who had dogs in their canoes that were saved. Aside from the misery of the rain and the storm, the wild animals caused considerable trouble. Most dangerous, however, were the trees which popped up to the surface, coming up by the thousands from the area below which once had been beautiful forests. Wolves and grizzly bears were also heading to the highest bits of land." Some clans' versions emphasize animals dying off during this time period, and a lot of the Canadian archaeologists have looked at this a lot more, and of course some of the work that Terry Fifield will talk about, and the graphics above the sea level chart that kind of shows the very quick sea level change in terms of geological history. But you see different animals that have now disappeared in southeast Alaska. So the Tlingit oral narratives that talk about animals dying off, there may be a lot to that. Some clans' versions emphasize animals dying off during this period. The narrative recited by Brown was given long before geologists were talking about sea level change and isostatic rebound. When one compares the ethnohistory of the southern clans with recent findings in geology and archaeology in southern southeast Alaska, one finds interesting parallels between the geological history and the Tlingit oral narratives. According to geologists, during that time period of about 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, there was a great change in the massive glaciers. At this point, many of the glaciers began to recede and sea level rose a few hundred feet in some places, changing the landscape from the past age. Fladmark, a coastal archaeologist working in British Columbia, wrote this summation about the end of the Pleistocene and beginning of the Holocene some 10,000 years ago. And there I have some of the quote from him that I'll read. "Pacific coast sea level sequences also reflect the varied interplay of isostatic, eustatic, and tectonic factors. Most areas close to the main coast range and centers of regional glaciation exhibit extremely high relative sea levels before about 10,000 years ago, accompanied by rates of uplift in some cases so rapid that significant vertical changes in sea level would have readily been apparent to any human observer in just a few years. Seems like there's some similarities, although flat marks is a little harder to read and understand. When we examine the information about the Tlingit story of the flood more closely, we see many of the subtleties that may have been interesting parallels in the geological and historical events of the region. Further archaeological and geological investigations may reinforce these narratives. Important to our understanding of these histories is realizing these narratives have been filtered through many layers of interpretation, including generations of tellers, new languages, interpreters, and recorders. The result may have been that the ethnographer or person recording the oral narratives edited important details that may be significant to our understanding of the paleo environment. An ethnographer in the early 1900s may have seen these narratives reinforcing or confirming notions of race, culture, and evolution through such biblical events as the flood, whereas an ethnographer in the 21st century finds documentation for a theory about glaciation, sea level changes, and the peopling of Alaska and the Americas. Today we find ourselves at a crossroads at a time when we face receding glaciers, increasing sea levels, and arguably climate change. I hope my presentation about Tlingit oral narratives and histories has reinforced its antiquity and authenticity. Whether these narratives are used to tell clan histories, or as we learned about yesterday, could be used for community-based place education, or for scientific understandings about the paleoclimate, I hope that the future generations will believe in the validity and legitimacy of the clan narratives. Ganesh Chish.
I'd like to introduce Ken Grant, who is a clan leader from Huna and also is with the National Park Service. Your title. And your talk is Preserving a Sacred Landscape.
My name that I grew up with, I know they want this recorded, is Klitha. It was my grandfather's brother's name, was passed on to me, and my real name is, as I grew up, my grandfather named me Kakatuklake, and I'll explain that because this, what I'm giving here actually lends itself very well to it. I'm a Taktain Tan, and also a Kagwan and a great-grandchild of the Chukanades. And my house comes from the outer coast, Kanaha. And this is the one that I'm wearing on here, but actually if you look real close, I also have a Park Service hat on because I do work for the Park Service. I'm the management assistant for Glacier Bay National Park. And Wayne Powell was supposed to give this presentation, and this is primarily his presentation, but as it turns out, I was very much a part of the history that he is talking about, so I'll follow his outline as much as I could. There may be a couple of slides where I didn't know where he was going. I saw this slideshow last night before I went to bed, but I have no problem with the history of it, so here we go. Before I start, though, I want to say thanks to Bert. Wonderful to see you. He and I shared a lot of time together going to Washington, D.C. in the old days when we were battling for our native rights. And I really enjoy seeing Martin Strand. He's my fellow Klansman. And I see Bob Schroeder. It's really wonderful to have you here. Greg Dudgeon, Terry Fifield, and Dan, you gave a good and Steve Langdon. But you know, most importantly, I want the eagles to raise their hand, all those that are eagles. I want to acknowledge the eagles that are here. In our culture, we say, when we acknowledge them all in one, we say, "Thakatkuknu Kate." Thakatkuknu Kate. When I say that, I'm acknowledging all the eagles. And I won't take time to mention your clans, but most important to me, because I'm a Kagwantan Yeti, I see Tom, I know he's got a Kagwantan name, and if there are any others out there, I acknowledge you. And, are there any clan leaders in here? Any house leaders? We have one here. Fred? Kiksari. Gunachish. Oh, another one over there. Which one? Shkindatan. Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's very good to have you here and to listen to this presentation. Before I begin, yesterday, I believe, might have been Tom mentioned the second ice age. Was that you, Tom? You don't remember? Oh, and Mary Beth probably mentioned it. But I'd like to give just a little preface to this presentation. I was involved with the Huna Indian Association, a tribal member, and they somehow chose to elect me the president. And in the course of time, I saw it necessary to create the traditional tribal council in which all the clan elders were a part of. And we had a meeting in Huna. It was, I believe it was SEAC that came to Huna, Southeast Alaska Conservation Council, SEAC anyway. And for some reason, the tribal community took over the meeting, and they put me as chairman at that time. And let me tell you, we were all in for some experience then, because during the course of the evening, I saw it fit to have the elders, those that we had at the time, I had them come up, line up, and tell their feelings about Glacier Bay, their ancestral homeland. And believe me, it was a very heavy time period, and it went on all night. To see the tears of the elders because of this deep roots that they have with place, with the homeland, and they were being severed at that time. This left a big imprint in my mind, very, very big. But what this did, I was writing a newsletter at the time, and I wrote, I don't even know it's a poem, it's a verse. And I hope I can remember it and don't mess it up for you, because I don't even have my notes here. But anyway, here's the gist of it. And remember, we were in a very, very dark period because we were being taken from our homeland. It goes something like this. This power we thought a friend has no face. This power we thought a friend has too many hands. This power we thought a friend has no spirit. And not only that, this power we thought a friend sheds no tears. Second Ice Age. And I think this was probably, I don't know if this was the driving force, but it's something that spurred me on because we're wrestling with someone without a face, someone that has too many hands, someone that has no spirit. And not only that, it sheds no tears. And what I was talking about was a cold federal policy. The cold federal policy sheds no tears, no remorse. And as it turns out, the messages that I was taking to Washington was, maybe it was heard, I don't know, but as a result, we got recognition. The tribes got recognition. Bert was there in Washington, D.C. Then we enter into a period, what I call the healing phase. The National Park Service reached out to the tribal community and began to work with the tribe. And here's where we are. As you can see on the first slide, you can see the Huna territory, and it's called Hunakau homeland. Those that aren't familiar with the geographics of the area, the body of water in the center of it is Icy Straits. And on the lower left hand, you see all blue there, that's Pacific Ocean. And you see Glacier Bay over here. On the outside coast, you'll see from Cape Spencer to here. That was Raven country, Takdaintan country, and then within the bay itself, the Chukanadis. And from the bay along the coast on Icy Straits, Wushkitan, and then also the Kagwantans. But I have stories that where all of the clans were in Glacier Bay. And I think, is Teshaki in the audience? Ken Austin? No, he's not. He said that there were clans. It wasn't specifically, I mean, there were clan houses, different clans that were in there. And actually, most of them reside within the bay and were all driven out of there. And these are the clans that the Huna territory, that are in the Huna territory. As you can see, the boundaries of the red is what we know now as Glacier Bay National Park. It goes way up into Dry Bay. And the park increased in size in 1980 after Anilka. Was that Anilka? Yeah, that was Anilka. And the purpose of this, you see the red dots, and these are very special places. On the lower right hand, you'll see Huna in Port Frederick, which is right here. And Huna is within Icy Straits, which we call Sit Tlein in our language, which means big dish, because many salmon come through there, crab, halibut, cod, you name it. All the rockfishes, shrimp, herring, all these things come through there, so we call it the big dish. The Park Service began its healing process with the tribe and sponsored programs with partnerships. The Park Service, the Huna school system, and the Huna Heritage Foundation, and chartered boats to take the clans people up into Glacier Bay. And this is one of the boats that it's called Seawolf that went up, that came and picked up our tribal people to go up into Glacier Bay. Here you see some elders that are going up to Glacier Bay, and you can imagine the joy that they had when they were going up to the homeland. You'll see on the far right, screen right, is Mary Johnson. She's Chukanadi, and seated next to her on the same side of the table is a person we called Grandma Ida. She was over 80 years old, 90 years old. I think she was just about 100 when she finally got on her canoe and left us. She's Shungukedi. She's a Thunderbird clan. And across from her is my mother. She's a Takdain Ton, a sea gal. And next to her is another Chukanadi, Amy Marvin. She's a very marvelous person. And she was the elder that did the spirit ceremonies for us. And during these trips was a time for learning. You could see the woman that's seated next to the young man there is actually her grandson, and she's teaching. It's an opportunity during these trips to teach the young people about the homeland. The woman seated there is Lil White. She's a very valuable resource for our people. She's just very knowledgeable about the Tlingit culture. As you can see on the lower left, it says Tlist. Tlist is a traditional gathering ground for the Huna Tlingit. This is in Dundas Bay. And to me, this is the Mesopotamia, the Garden of Eden for the Huna Tlingit. When you go into that valley, that Listi Valley, you could smell the green, you could smell the berries, you could, the Nagoon berries are very aromatic, and the strawberries, I mean, you could just, when you walk in there, you know that it's a very fertile valley. And Listi is what my grandmother always referred to as the river. She called that river Listi. However, I believe that there is a fort there that was called Listi. But you see the young people getting out of the charter boat. Here's another trip. This one is, this is Dundas Bay. at.oow is at a fort site there. There is a fort there that my grandmother used to talk about when we, as young people, walked the grounds in Dundas Bay. I remember my grandmother. She was a stout woman. I really don't know how tall she was because I was still pretty young when she died. But she was really a stout woman. She would go with us. She'd pack all the equipment. And we as young kids, we were, in a loving way, we were our grandparents' slaves. We were their gouls. We packed all these jars of mason jars up into the muskegs and gathered berries. Her grandmother sat on the muskeg. She'd pick a spot and sit there and sing all the ancient songs, just sitting there, as we as grandchildren would gather the berries, and my grandfather would be gathering. And we didn't clean it up. We took it to her, and she cleaned up the berries and put them into these jars up there. I mean, we were a long ways from the beach. And she sang the songs, and I can see pictures of her, and I do intend to write a story on this. And I'm going to attempt to even draw my grandmother sitting out on the muskegs there and singing, just singing her songs. And something, when you're young kids, most of the berries go into your mouth. And I think I still have that problem because, But something, my grandparents, they never reprimanded us. They knew we were eating it, but we were important because we got to carry all this stuff back down to the beach again. Anyway, here we have the young children, the young people from the Huna school system, and we're way up in Dundas Bay. In fact, this here is called at.oow, and as I understand it, before I say that though, my grandmother always referred to one particular spot in Dundas Bay, and she never told us the significance of it. She called it Huna, which is the later name because Huna is a recent town. She would tell us Hunakau Dachnacha when she's talking about a berry patch. On the other side, upper side of Hunakau or Hunakau Ichnacha. She always used that one reference point on the south side of Hunakau, the fort. Or Henachanach Yutlianach on this side, on the other side of Hunakau. And I know that at there, I think Aaron, who's the one that wrote that book about continents? Aaron Crowell, yeah. I know he was planning to do some digs there, and he was telling me where he was going to do the digs on the outside coast, and I mentioned, why don't you look over at Dundas Bay? I know my grandmother always referred to a fort site there, and it turns out that there was a fort site there. And I might have the dates wrong, but I believe the oldest dig in this particular spot was 6,400 years old. So we were living there long before the pyramids were built. And I know there were later ones after contact too, and there is a place near this that has a gravesite with Christian burials with monuments there. So. The next special place, let's see, he's got Huna. After our people were forced out of Glacier Bay, we eventually settled up in Huna, as you can see on the lower right-hand corner in yellow there is Huna. Our clans actually dispersed in different areas, but because of Western culture with mandatory schools, eventually all of the clans ended up in Huna. Many of you are acquainted with the translation of Huna. It's Huna, or Hunia is the real one, which is a shelter from the north wind. And if you've ever been up there into Huna, when it's blowing 60 miles an hour out in the Chatham Straits north wind, you come to Huna, it'll be nice and peaceful. It's really a wonderful place. Our ancestors knew how to choose places. Here we have the landmark that gives one of the names to Huna. It's a rock cliff on next to the water there on the left, where it got its name from, Gao. And Huna first became Gao Takan, which is a village beside the cliff with a drum, which is on the outer side. But this is a very old picture. You can see that there is a tunnel there that goes through. On the other side is the cannery, where the fish processing took place. And on this side, we have Huna. This is a later picture, and it's still referred to as a tunnel, even though there's no tunnel there anymore. It's more modern. It's paved all the way to the cannery now. At this time, I don't think it was I think the paving stopped here. But this is the cliff that gave, you'll hear about Gao Takan, and that's Huna. And Wayne put one of our, I will call it a pictograph. I never heard a real official name, but it's a pictograph. This here actually was, the story goes that it's blood painting on a cliff that commemorates a battle that took place some time ago, before contact. There were conflicts, and a gentleman was challenged to climb this cliff, and then he climbed it, and he gave the signal and called all the troops, and eventually our side was victorious. Anyway, if you go to Huna, you can walk right to it, you can see it, and not very many people know it's there, but it's quite visible. And I'm sure this picture was taken fairly recently. Now this is Wayne's picture, and he didn't tell me what it was supposed to represent. I'm kind of thinking because of that cliff that this might represent Cheat, which is a person that climbed a cliff. But I don't know because it looks like there's a livree in the lower lip. It might be a woman. So anyway, I don't know where he was headed with this one. The next special place you will see there on the Pacific Ocean there is Kanaha, which is my clan, and that's why I wear what I have with the kittiwakes on it. It's a very special place. For reference, down here is Cape Spencer, and then that bay there is Lituya Bay. So Kanaha is near halfway, a little more than a third of the distance up to Lituya Bay. Here's a picture of Kanaha. It's an arch. I think today it's called Busol Head. But this here has the origins of where we get the gull cry, the kittiwake cry. I don't know how many of you have heard it. Have you heard it? How many heard it? Oh, a good bunch here. It originated either here or up in Cenotaph Island. But here is where the story comes from. When a wave hits the shore on this is the Pacific coast, and as it turns out, this was September, and the weather was real nice. You couldn't believe how flat calm it was in September. It was galing before that, but we had this trip scheduled. We had charters all set up, and we couldn't back out. We said, let's do it anyway. And lo and behold, it got calm all the time we were out in the Gulf Coast. Here we have a picture. I don't know if my sister Lillian is in the audience. She probably isn't, but she's our clan mother, Lillian Hillman here, has a blanket that depicts the Kanaha. And as you can see, it has all the gulls there with the nests. And the image in the middle represents the head, Basol head Kanaha. And legend has it that stories are told of an octopus that resided within the arch. I'll go back to the arch. There are stories that there was a large octopus that resided in this arch here, and it's actually very deep. You can take a large boat through there. We went up there a few years ago. I can't recall what exact year, but one of the wishes that she was the clan mother, the woman seated with the blue and the headband on this, Mary Wilson. She was the clan mother, and she had this wish that she wanted to see it before she passed away. And she made it known to me for many, many times over. I was a boat captain, but I had to pay the bills and didn't have time to take her up there. But we did take her up there, and she got to see the origin of, you can see the gull that she's wearing on her headband and on her vest. And my mother, she has a gull on her vest too. But the story goes something like this. A person went up there, I don't know when the first person went there, and called another individual in a loud voice, and the kittiwakes, they all took off, and they all start saying, mimicking the noise they heard. Like if you would have said my name, Kotha, 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 you know, you get to hear them. I can't do that seagull cries, but you can imagine what it sounded like. They'd all take off, and the story is that whoever you named or yelled loudly, the gulls, the kittiwakes would mimic the sound, and now we use it. It's a very happy time when we're celebrating something. We get the we call them the seagulls. I call them the seagulls out, and I see some sitting here in the audience. Let's see, any other seagulls? I know I have some honorary ones back here. Yeah. We were over in let's see, Pennsylvania Museum of Pennsylvania Museum. Here we go. Marlene was the only seagull we had, and we wanted to show our appreciation, so I made some honorary seagulls out of Stacy and Lucy back there, and they did a great job anyway. So, but after seeing the Busol or the Qanaha, our clan mother didn't last very long afterward. She got on her canoe and left us. And my mother is actually, she's very frail. She's almost 90, but she is also very thrilled to have seen Qanaha. Here you'll see some two young people who are out there to celebrate the arch. My sister and I were out there, and on the left-hand frame there, you'll see that's where all the gulls were, and when the waves hit and made this loud rumble, the gulls would take off and make their gull cry. And if the clouds weren't there, you might be able to see part of the Fairweather Range. You can hardly see on the lower right-hand side, just above Huna there's a red KAX. And I'm not going to bother to adjust it because I might have to adjust it again. But anyway, the word is Kuknuwu, and this is known as Kagwantan country. Kuk is a female hen, or the hen grouse, and it's a hen fort, Grouse Hen Fort. The fort actually has 10,000-year digs in it, and we were able to repatriate from the Forest Service the objects from Grouse Fort. And it's Kagwantan country, and you'll see on the very far right is the Kagwantan leader, and the young people from the Huna schools learning about the Kagwantan country. The way we were operating was we get to take the young people to the different sacred sites of all the different clans. Reason we did this was to give them a real depth of what their culture is all about, because we felt that hearing about it from elders but not seeing it was not enough. But going on it, stepping on it, and feeling the presence was pretty important. So this is what it all. We went over to the Kuknuwu. These are elders, very, very knowledgeable elders. They're no longer with us. They got on our canoes and left us, got on their canoes and left us a long time ago. On the far left is a Willie Ross, and someone mentioned, Tom asked about what happened when the glacier reached Point Adolphus there, and I heard his story, and I have the recording at home where he, after the Huna Tlingit, we call them Huna Tlingit because it's recent, but our Glacier Bay people left and settled in Huna. After they established Huna, they went back, and what they did is they sacrificed 2 slaves. This has never been addressed by the intellectual community, but we did have slaves, and we did things like this. And the way he put it, we sit, means they hexed the glacier. They sacrificed 2 slaves. They took the brains, the brains. They took it and they rubbed it on the glacier, and then the glacier started to recede. But anyway, I got that story from Willie Ross. He's on the far left. In the middle is Otto Lindhoff, and I really don't know who the other one is there. I might have been away for high school or something when this was taking place. But on above Willie Ross there on the left, look up and you'll see a head coming down there. There was a place there where the Kagwantans did sacrifices, and it went between a cliff. And you saw it, Tom. Did you see it? Yeah, but these are real stories. These are, and there are names that bear it out too. And I don't have the place name map before me. Anyway, this screen came from Kuknu. The next, I think I'm losing this thing. Am I? Am I okay? The next place you'll see a special name is Qisluk. In our language, Qisluk is a ravine, a little valley. And this here is up on top of Mount Fairweather. It's alongside of, actually it's part of Mount Fairweather. And we use the term quite a bit, and I'll tell you why. This screen here was from what we call, it used to be Fairweather House, became Snail House. And we call this screen, and screens, at.oow, when we talk about at.oow, they always have a name. It's not just simply a blanket or a screen. This screen was called Qisluk, and as you can see, it has on the top, I might be the snail, and then in the middle, there's a raven there with the wings. And a king salmon, holding a king salmon. A lot of you heard the story, I know, on UPenn, the Pennsylvania Museum, and they call it barbecue. I think they call it a barbecue. But you know the story of when Raven tricked the salmon to come in, and he got the salmon and he sent the birds over the mountains to get some real good, pure skunk cabbage leaves. Anyway, you'll see it in there. I'm wondering what this young man is thinking. He's standing on the coast outside of Latria Bay. And I think I know, but I'll tell you here. Sit Tlein. This is a very, very sacred mountain to our people. It's our spirit mountain. A lot of events occurred on this mountain. A lot of our songs, a lot of our stories come from Mount Fairweather. And when I was growing up, my grandmother took me aside, and under no certain, there was no doubt in her mind, she was telling me, do not point at Mount Fairweather. Do not point at Mount, and she said it real, she had me, I think she was even pulling my ears. And she was telling me, under no circumstances, the reason we do that is we don't point at people that we respect, we don't, it's kind of disrespectful if our people do that, so. But it just tells you how sacred the mountain is. We have a song, and a lot of you have heard it. I know the Pennsylvania people have heard Trembling Mountain. Did we do that one over there? I think we did Trembling Mountain over there. Our shaman witnessed, or he had a vision of the mountain opening up. The mountain opened up, and out of it came the Mount Fairweather women, and you'll see it when we'll get to that slide. And from there, we got part of our at.oow. The women came out dancing. Those of you that are Raven Gals know it. They came out swaying. As they sang, they swayed, and they had this piece of fur hanging off their ear. The fur is called a da in our language, and it's ermine. So this is actually at.oow for the Dakdainton women, and that's where that story comes from. And Mount Fairweather is the origin for what you see here, the hats we call them the Mount Fairweather hats. The one on the left, next to Jake White is here, the gentleman seated there. It's called the Fairweather Women hat, and I told you the story where the mountain opened up and the women came out dancing with their daws in their ears. That's what that hat depicts, and it's a very sacred hat. It's brought out very, very rarely, only on very, very special occasions does it ever come out. And the one on the left is the Fairweather Spirit Dog hat. It's called Shatokwan Ke Litz'ah. See, our people at.oow has a name, Shatokwan Ke Litz'ah, the Fairweather Spirit Dog hat. And the Fairweather Woman hat is called Shatokwan Shao Tz'ah, the Fairweather, the women from within Mount Fairweather hat. Here we are with the young people. They're learning about the Taktain Tan, and we have Lil White and myself. I'm very grateful to have Lil White with me. As it turns out, both of us, it fell on our laps. We do the workshops for the young people and transfer what we know into the young people's minds. The hats again. I showed you that rain screen that was called, Qisak. And my mother is very far advanced in age, and she has difficulty remembering things. But I asked her, because I haven't heard what the stories are about Qisak, and she told me a story, and I'll relate this to you. I know I'm taking too much of your time now, but hear me out on this one, okay? It's a love story. She said the two peaks were in love on top of Mount Fairweather, and I know there is a story like that with St. Elias, but this is about Mount Fairweather. At the time came that one of them had to leave and said, I'm going to have to leave now. And the response from the other, I don't know which one was the male or female, probably the female was staying. And the response was, okay, I know you have to leave, but don't go very far because I want to keep you in my sight. And he said, okay. And there, when you look on top of Mount Fairweather, you'll see what we call Qisak. So he didn't go very far. You know, I wrestled with it. I was not really clear because I thought maybe the next one might have been Qisak. Whether it's ravine, no, I think it's a big valley. The ravine, I think, is on top. But my mother always told me another story just before I came here. And I really treasure it because her mental facilities are it comes and goes, but when you talk Tlingit to her, she understands really well. She was telling me a story where I'm pretty sure it was Jauk, our shaman who went up the mountain. There was a spirit telling Jauk, where are you going to go? You won't need any jackets. You won't need any warm clothes. Leave it behind. And gave directions. But as the shaman to be walked up the mountain would take a wrong turn, and the spirits say, no, you're going the wrong way. And she told me in Tlingit, and go back and go the other way. And he kept on going. He made it to the top of the mountain. He made it to Qisak. And she said Qisak was a tribal house, a Kuik house, up on top when this individual got up there. And she said it was at this point where all the animals were coming in. And if all of you are familiar with the Tlingit style of coming in, we don't just walk in. we come in dancing. And all of the critters, living critters, were coming into this tribal house, dancing the entrance song. And it was called Dak Adi. Dak Adi. And I recall hearing this song when I was very young, and I wish I knew all of it. Dak Adi, Dak Adi, Dak Adi. You know, you can see the brown bear coming in, you could see the mountain goat coming in, you could see all the critters coming in into this kuig up on Mount Fairweather. And I know that's where that song came from. So, young people they went up into Lituya Bay and they got to feel the presence of the ancestors. This young lady is Takdain Town. And there's the mountain. Young people they built a campfire on the beach and lived there for, I believe, a couple of days. Next one is Wishkitan country, Waitirinu. You'll see it on the right there. Waitirinu. It's within Glacier Excursion Inlet. And these are the Wishkitans with Elder Sam Hanlon in there. Ernie Jack. Wayne Powell was adopted into the Wishkitan clan. Sam's daughter and Penny Cornell. Here we have, and this is within the park too. Part of Excursion Inlet is in the park, and here we have that Waitirinu, which is a fort in Excursion Inlet. You can see the fort, the palisade, and Wayne Howe is wearing the blanket. Here we have the young people over in Excursion Inlet. We were at a grave site. I believe this had to be the traditional grave site. It was a grave house that had deteriorated, almost gone. We could hardly see it. There were boxes that were taken from there, and we repatriated the remains there. By the way, that stick I'm carrying, I didn't have a drum, and we were doing the seagull cry then, so I found a stick that had a tune, and I beat it with a stick, and they did the seagull cry. Sit Tlein. This is where Kenny Austin, where he would come in, but I don't see him in the audience. What it means is a large glacier. Sit Tlein. It's up at the head of Glacier Bay. And the story that Kenny Austin told us yesterday, the spirit that's within the ice depicted on this, I'm not so sure if there was a blanket or back of a vest. And the woman in the center is the woman that perished in the ice. Young people really learn. They learn to do the spirit songs. They learn to do the thank you, the cross-culture appreciation between the raven and the eagles. And by the way, there's someone really important there to me. In the center is my grandson. There. Here's a spirit ceremony, and I believe very strongly that without our ceremonies, without our rituals, our culture will die. We need these things, you know. Our language is pretty important, but if we get rid of our rituals, I know we'll just be a number. During the ceremony, something happened. This here's the Bear Clan, the Chukanady clan. As it turns out, during the ceremony on the ice right along the shore there, you will see a bear. The school put out a publication on the top was at Kuknu, the Kagwantan country, and then you'll see the glacier again. Another picture of the bear. Young people get to learn about their foods, learn how to prepare it. I think it looks like they have Yana 8 there, and you can see smoked fish. And we showed them how to pick gumboots and how to cook it. You can see a gumboot there, that's from Glacier Bay. And the school made another trip with I believe, high school, and they went into Glacier Bay and did kayaking in there. Here you'll see them appreciating the glaciers. The same trip in Glacier Bay. This looks like Taylor Bay, if you're familiar with it. Needs no words. Sam Hanlon. Anyway, I started out with a pretty heavy verse that I wrote. It was a great rift. There was a lot of pain. All of you are aware of what happens when you lose touch with your land, because you have all of your stories and songs, all of your rituals, the sacred sites. But now the Park Service is very much a partner with the tribe in the healing phase. And as you can see, the school trips and these things are very important for the young people, and they will learn it now. I'm sure this is the last one. Anyway, thank you very much.
My name is Madonna Moss, and I'm from the University of Oregon. And I see two people in the audience I want to acknowledge. One is Shkindu Tun, who I'm very grateful to her parents and her grandparents, because they welcomed me into their house in Angoon back in 1978 when I first came to Alaska. So Shkin, thank you, and please convey my greetings to your parents, Joanne and Gabriel, and to your grandmother, Lydia. And also, I see a person I haven't met in person yet, but that's Andrew Gamble from Angoon. And I want to acknowledge your brother, Ivan, who made it possible for me to do my dissertation research in Angoon years ago. So it's a real privilege to have you here as well. Thank you. Okay, I hope that some of the seagulls will stay for my talk, because I do have some pictures of birds. And this work here is about the Haida and Tlingit use of seabirds on the Forrester Islands in southern Southeast Alaska. And we heard on Thursday, and we've seen lots of seabirds so far, but Eugene Hun and Tom Thornton and co-authors recently demonstrated the cultural importance of gull egg collecting by the Huna Tlingit in Glacier Bay. Their compelling studies showed the efficacy of Tlingit traditional environmental knowledge in promoting long-term sustainable use of gull eggs. Other than this single study, however, there's little known about the Tlingit or Haida use of seabirds in Southeast Alaska. Although biologists have identified at least 91 seabird colonies in Southeast Alaska, native use of most of these has not been documented, and that includes the St. Lazaria Islands here in Sitka as well. The Forrester Islands lie beyond the Prince of Wales archipelago in the eastern Gulf of Alaska. The islands are part of the Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service headquartered in Anchorage. You can see the forest land is in green here, and the wildlife refuge is in white. The Forrester Islands' importance as wildlife habitat was officially recognized in 1912 when President Taft signed Executive Order 1458, making it illegal to hunt, capture, or disturb any bird or their eggs on the islands. So this case is really similar to Glacier Bay in some respects. This action set aside the Forrester Islands as a bird sanctuary or so-called reservation. Not only do the Forrester Islands provide steep cliffs for bird colonies, they support spruce forests that have loose soils that burrowing seabirds require for nest building. Can I just stand over here? Can you hear me? And so I don't have to use the mic? Okay, all right. Okay, I'll just straddle it here. The absence of terrestrial predators. There aren't terrestrial mammals here that go after the seabirds, and this is another reason why the Forrester Islands comprise the largest seabird colony in the eastern Gulf of Alaska, providing nesting grounds for over 1 million birds. Ethnographic use of the Forrester Islands is indicated by Niblock, Swanton, Heath, Garfield and Forrest, Steve Langdon, Emmons, and Tom Thornton. Part of the reasons the foresters have not been surveyed for archaeological sites before is because they are administered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for the purpose of protecting marine mammals, in particular stellar sea lions shown here, and these are on the south side of Lowry Island. And they're also protected for the migratory seabirds. The wildlife refuge has been spared the commercial and industrial land use that often threatens archaeological sites in Alaska. And this shows you some of the largest islands in the Forrester. There's Forrester Island itself, Lowry Island, and Petrel Island. And those stellar sea lions we saw were just on Lowry, and most of the stellar sea lions haul out on Lowry. In 2004, I surveyed Lowry Island on foot from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game Base Camp. In 2005, Deborah Corbett from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and I conducted shoreline survey of Forrester Island by boat. The 2005 project began with interviews of Haida elders in Heidelberg, led by University of Alaska Anchorage anthropologist Steve Langdon and Heidelberg Cooperative Association environmental planner Anthony Christensen. This provided crucial cultural context for understanding the importance of the seabirds. Of 8 archaeological sites identified during 2004 and 2005, 5 sites have yielded good samples of seabird remains. These are the bones. These include 4 sites on Forrester Island, Waterfall Cave here, the Saddle site here, and then Soft Shell and Red Lichen Cave on this side. And then I'll talk about Elderberry Cave on Lowry Island. The radiocarbon dates from these 5 sites are presented here, and I've highlighted the oldest dates. These are approximately 1,600 years ago. Along with the historic occupation of Eagle Harbor on Forrester Island, these sites represent occupation ranging from AD 360 and the World War II era. The oral historical information we gathered in Heidelberg testifies to the use of the Forrester Islands into the 19th and 20th and 21st centuries. Waterfall Cave is the only archaeological sea cave thus identified on the east side of Forrester Island, the side of the island that is more protected than the surf-beaten west coast. And we're approaching the cave here. You can see it as the entrance. And then this is a sketch map of the inside of the cave. And that's Deborah Corbett from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The cave is 25 meters long and 15 meters wide. Here's a view of some of the surface remains. And you can see, hopefully you can see some mussel shell here. There are some fish bone, there's some bird bone, mostly bird bone, and also some fish bone here. And this is on the surface and has been largely undisturbed since it was left behind. Near the center of the cave, we found a hearth nestled within boulders containing charcoal, ash, unburned wood, mussel shells, and bones. And here's an artifact, a cobble tool that's been partially modified by use that was found in association with this hearth that was tucked under a rock. The radiocarbon dates suggest occupation between AD 1460 and 1710. The recovered faunal sample from the site came from a depth of 15 centimeters below the surface and contained mussel shells, some barnacle, some fish, and bird bone. Of the bird bones identified to family, most are rhinoceros auklet, with Cassin's auklet, tufted puffin, and Leach's storm petrel also found. But the bulk of the bones from this particular site were rhinoceros auklet. The saddle site is located on the east side of Forrester Island, where a low-lying saddle crosses the island from east to west. So this is the saddle, and you can pass through this on a trail. There's no trail, but you can go through the brush and get to the west side of the island here. But in these areas up onto either side, the soil is riddled with these burrows of the birds. Oh, thank you. So I don't have to. Thank you, Tom. Okay. The shell midden was found over a 25 meter by 5 meter area using a 1-inch soil probe. The site area is vegetated with widely spaced spruce trees, and the ground is covered with thick grasses in a park-like setting. A trowel probe revealed blackened soil, charcoal, fragmented mussel shell, and numerous bird bones to a depth of 20 centimeters. The recovered samples contained fragmented mussel shell and quite a bit of bird bone dating between AD 1660 and 1830. Most common were Cassin's auklet and rhinoceros auklet, but tufted puffin, pelagic cormorant, common murre, gull, and Leach's storm petrel were also identified. The site lies within an area Mr. Robert Sanderson of Heidelberg identified as a place the Kaugani Haida went to collect seabird eggs in the 20th century. Clearly, people were obtaining not just the eggs, but the birds themselves. Red Lichen Cave and Soft Shell Caves are located only 40 meters apart as the gull flies on the west side of Forrester Island. But I can tell you that it's only 40 meters, but these rocks are really large, and it took me quite a long time to climb over the rocks between the two sites here. Oh, I should be using this. Sorry. Oh, okay. Sorry. All right. Yes, I can. And I'll just tell you that this is only 40 meters, this distance, but because these rocks are so large, it takes quite a while for me to walk from here to there. And this is a place where it's not easy to land. We had to land way off to the right here because it's a very rough area. Okay. So this is Red Lichen Cave, the entrance to it. It was named for the pincushion orange lichen that grows on the rock surface surrounding its entrance. The cave is 58 meters long and about 10 meters wide and is 10 and a half meters above high tide line. 2 samples recovered from the cave floor were rich in bird bone, but also contained lingcod bones, mussel and limpet shells, and bird egg shells. Oh, write these out. So you can see the mussel shells here. There's some bird bone, but there are also egg shells. These are bird egg shells that were found in this site. And there were 2 samples taken from the site. Fairly small samples, but they produced quite a bit in the way of bird bone. Many of the bones are relatively large fragments, again, having not experienced much disturbance, but they show extensive surface weathering, including staining with organic growth, acid etching, and exfoliation. Of the birds identified to families, shearwater, adult and juvenile gull, juvenile cormorant, rhinoceros auklet, and Cassin's auklet are present. But most are tufted puffin and common murre. The site falls within the general area Mr. Robert Sanderson identified as a locality for gathering gull eggs. Softshell Cave is another sea cave located about 9 meters above high tide, adjacent to a colony of glaucous wing gulls. And get a feel for the landscape here. These are really incredible places. I feel very fortunate to have been there. But what looks like an old landslide track here is actually part of the area where the gulls are building their nests. Oh, you can't hear me when I did that. Okay. Sorry. How do I do this? Okay. So there's a gull nesting area over here, and then this is the entrance to Softshell Cave here. Oh, with this here. I don't think anybody else had trouble with this. I don't know. I'm not sure why I am. Okay. Oh, and you can see the gulls here. The day that I came was August 10th, 2005, and you can see these two birds are still standing firm at their nest here, but others are quite, they're somewhat agitated that I'm coming here, but although I didn't go onto the nesting site, of course, I tried not to disturb them. In this slide, hopefully you can see some of the nests themselves. And here's that pair that are still standing firm. Gulls overhead, get a feel for the rockiness of the landscape and the entrance to Softshell Cave. And it's a fairly recent sea cave. You can see there's not much vegetation that's grown on in the area. It's fairly recently uplifted. Okay. The cave is 52 meters long and about 10 meters wide at its entrance. A single faunal sample taken from this area here was dated to AD 410 to 590. The sample was predominantly bird bone, but also included mussel shell, black Katy chitin shell. We saw live chitin in Ken's presentation just now, and lingcod bones. Most of the bones were common murre, but tufted puffin, Cassin's auklet, gull, cormorant, shearwater, and ancient murrelet were also identified. Some of the gull and cormorant bones are from juvenile birds. The most striking aspects of these results is that the common murre is the most abundant species among the faunal remains, whereas the site is immediately adjacent to a glaucous wing gull colony. So there's that discrepancy. Although not numerous, shearwaters were found at both red lichen and softshell caves. To my knowledge, the genus Puffinus, the shearwater, has never been before identified in an archaeological site in southeast Alaska. Shearwaters were not represented amongst the 33 species inventoried by field biologist Harold Heath in 1913, although George Willett wrote that the sooty shearwater was, quote, seen occasionally throughout the summer, generally a half-mile or more offshore, but on one occasion between Forrester and Lowry Islands. Whether or not the pelagic shearwaters were deliberately hunted by the Kaigani Haida or Tlingit off Forrester Island cannot be determined with the archaeological evidence at hand. At both softshell and red lichen caves, gulls and cormorants were represented by juveniles as well as adults, indicating midsummer occupation. And these are two of the juveniles that I encountered making my way to the site. You can see this one is kind of crouching and trying to disappear. And this one is spent a lot of time walking around this particular 1 meter square area of rock. But they couldn't fly yet, and this was in August. Juveniles were apparently not the primary target of use, however, since juvenile bones make up a relatively small number of the materials found in both assemblages. Bird eggshells were found in both cave sites, though. In the few gull nests I examined, no traces of eggshell were present, yet eggshells were present in scatters of cultural materials in both caves. Field observations by biologists as well as experimental studies show that gulls remove eggshells from their colonies as a defense against predators. Even though HIDA consultants had focused our discussion on gull egg collecting, and you can see there's actually a gull egg on the table over here. Even though they focused on gull egg collecting, people were obviously hunting the birds as well. Okay. But what was interesting is that these eggshells are not gull eggs. They turn out to be the eggshells of the common murre. And I was able to identify these shell fragments by using an extensive collection of eggshells at the University of Oregon Museum of Natural and Cultural History. And it's really ironic that a lot of the early biologists who studied seabirds in places like Forrester Islands and elsewhere, a place would get designated as an important migratory bird place, let's say, and the biologists go in and the first thing that they do, of course, is shoot birds to take specimens back to museums, and then they collect eggs to put the eggshells in museums. So it's a little counterintuitive, shall we say. Elderberry Cave is located on the west side of Lowry Island. And it's tucked up along this sea stack, what was a former sea stack that is now back in the forest through isostatic rebound. So it's up against this landform. It's about 12 to 15 meters above high tide. It's a former sea cave. It's 12 meters long by 5 meters wide at its entrance, and I excavated a single 1.5 meter by 1 meter test pit in the center of the cave at its entrance, and this test pit went down 70 centimeters. So the test pit, this is a plan drawing, and the test pit is here, and I'm excavating in the mouth of the cave. The lowest level of the deposit dated to AD 390 to 570, and the uppermost level is dated to AD 1590 to 1810. Tufted puffins are the most abundant bird, then Cassin's auklet, followed by pelagic cormorant, bald eagle, fork-tailed storm petrel, ancient murrelet, and marbled murrelet. The use of birds on the west side of Forrester Island appears to have differed from that on the east side. Recall that Waterfall Cave and the Saddle Site are on the east, and red lichen and softshell caves are on the west side of Forrester. The most abundant species at red lichen and softshell caves are common murres and tufted puffins. The west coast caves appear to have been occupied when murres were locally abundant, presumably when nesting in the site vicinity. In stratified sea cliff colonies, puffins typically nest above both murres and gulls. Whether murres and puffins were taken on their colonies or in the nearby waters is not indicated from the archaeological remains. Certainly the birds would be vulnerable while nesting, but it is also likely that the Haida and Tlingit fished for birds. Biologist Heath described the tufted puffins of Forrester Island following the rowboats of the salmon trollers and cleaning the bait off the hooks of the fishermen. Heath also described fishermen using gaff hooks to catch puffins. On the east side of the island, Cassin's auklet and rhinoceros auklets are equally abundant at the Saddle Site. From Waterfall Cave, most of the remains were rhinoceros auklet. While climbing the headlands around the Saddle Site, I saw numerous bird burrows, presumably from rhinoceros auklets. Biologist Heath measured such burrows and found that they were at least 8 feet long and some as many as 20 feet long. So these birds are using their beaks and their feet to dig these long burrows. They're amazing. Both Cassin's auklets and ancient murrelets also occupy some of the rhinoceros auklet burrows. In 1915, Heath wrote that, quote, "The natives are unanimous in declaring that they now know of no other nesting site of the rhinoceros auklet in southeastern Alaska," end of quote. We know that not all nesting colonies of rhinoceros auklets are on the east side of Forrester Island. I'm sorry, we now know that all the nesting colonies of rhinoceros auklets are on the eastern side of Forrester Island, and that egg laying begins during the last week in May. Rhinoceros auklets are rarely seen during the day when they fly to the more protected waters around Dall, Prince of Wales, and Sumez Islands to feed. The mating pair takes turns incubating the eggs. One mate sits on the eggs from about 2 a.m. to 11 p.m., while the other one takes the 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift. It was during the middle of the night, when the birds were changing positions, that the Haida built bonfires amidst their burrows to confuse the birds. Rhinoceros auklets were then easily dispatched with spruce boughs. Cassin's auklets are also attracted to firelight, and the Haida reportedly captured them, much like they did rhinoceros auklets. Lowry Island is considerably smaller and lower in elevation when compared to Forrester Island itself. Tufted puffins are the most common species found in the assemblage, but Cassin's auklets are also abundant. Both species are frequently seen on the island today. Puffins are more often seen flying to and from their nests with their beaks filled with fish, while Cassin's auklet carcasses litter the woods, since they seem to strike trees when tending their nests at night. In their descriptions of the Forrester Islands, contemporary Haida elders emphasized egg collecting, and they were very specific, with June 8th being the target date for collecting eggs from the islands. Hun, Thornton, and co-authors have shown that gull egg collecting by the Huna Tlingit in Glacier Bay is important, not only to provide for food and materials, but also to mark springtime as a time of renewal, when the Huna reassert their claim to a traditional place. And we've seen that in Ken's presentation today, and we saw that in Mary Beth Moss's session throughout that session the other day. Certainly the Forrester Islands represent a very special place to the Haida and the Tlingit. I can imagine Haida and Tlingit groups camped on Dall or other islands in the early spring. When they saw flocks of rhinoceros auklets arrive in late April to feed, they knew that seabird nesting on the Forrester Islands was about to begin. They could wait for auspicious weather to canoe across to the Forresters. As Heath wrote, the Haida, quote, repaired to this summer resort for their annual egg and bird collecting holiday, end of quote. The good weather signaled the richness of the food gathering season to come. One aspect of this activity, oh, yes, go ahead.
Forrester Island is right in the middle of the ocean. How do you land on there? Is there a safe place to land?
There's not really a safe place to land. The easiest place to land is probably Eagle Harbor on the northeastern side, and that's where the salmon trolling camp was in the early part of the 20th century. And we did land there, but it's not an easy place to land. Yeah. There was somebody else waving me down. Was that? Okay. But yeah, it's not an easy place to land, and we were very lucky to get out there at all. And Steve Langdon, who's and Tony Christensen and the Haida elders were going to come with us to Forrester Island. But we had to wait several days to get a boat to take us out, and it wasn't possible for them to go when we were able to get out there. The weather was, whenever it's sunny and clear, you have high winds that make it difficult to land. So, yeah, it's a tricky place to get to, absolutely. Have you been there? Okay. I'll just continue, but we can talk more about the access in a little bit if you'd like. One aspect of the activity, however, I was mentioning that the people in Heidelberg talked a lot about the eggs, but they did not talk about obtaining the birds themselves. And I suspect that this is because migratory birds have been protected by law for almost 100 years, that this is not something that people feel they can discuss openly. But certainly, we know birds were taken, seabirds were important, and in this case of this chilcat robe, more than 200 puffin beaks have been used to ornament this Tlingit dance apron. When the Forrester Islands were designated as a bird sanctuary in 1912, the taking of birds from the islands during any season was outlawed. More broadly, between 1916 and 2003, the hunting of migratory birds during the spring and summer by Alaska Natives was illegal. The 1916 Migratory Bird Treaty with Canada did not prohibit duck and geese hunting in the fall, an activity in which both native and non-native hunters participated. While the intent of this and other treaties was to protect migratory birds and allow for fall sports hunting, these treaties ignored the customary use of birds by Alaska Natives during the spring and the summer. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act Protocol Amendment of 1995 aimed to redress this long-term discrimination against Alaska Natives. The amendment provides for customary and traditional use of migratory birds and their eggs, and this is a quote, for subsistence use by indigenous inhabitants of Alaska, end of quote, but then it goes on to say, it is not the intent of the amendment to cause significant increases in the take of species of migratory birds relative to their continental population sizes. End of quote. So this places the management agencies in the awkward position of having to document past harvests that were technically illegal in order to estimate the number of birds taken. So you can see that this is a problem. Nevertheless, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Alaska Department of Fish and Game surveyed, again, quote, subsistence harvest, and in 2000, the Alaska Migratory Bird Co-Management Council was established. In 2003, the council issued its first annual harvest regulations. The 2004 harvest regulations, as you know in this room, identified Huna as the only Southeast Alaskan community eligible for spring and summer migratory bird harvest. The Huna were allowed to collect glaucous wing gull eggs on national forest lands, but not in Glacier Bay National Park. The 2005, 2006, and 2007 harvest regulations have identified both Heidelberg and Craig as eligible communities. They were permitted, and they will be permitted, to collect gull eggs from the areas indicated on the map, but as you can see, the Forrester Islands are excluded from the harvest area. Puffin, puffin, flew in from the sea. Puffin, puffin, flew in from the sea. Make yourself meaty, puffin. And this is the Forrester Island bird song by Jesse Natkong, and it was recorded in 1985 in Heidelberg, Alaska, by John Enrico. Thus, the meaty puffin and other seabirds were highly valued as hataye resources and messengers of the harvest season. Puffins and other seabirds were also valued for their beaks, their feathers, their skin, and their bones. Investigation of 5 archaeological sites on the Forrester Islands have yielded good samples of seabird bone remains. The presence of immature gulls and cormorants and common murre eggshells at 2 of the sites clearly show summer harvest of seabirds. The ethnographic and historical information discussed in relation to the other 3 sites also indicate spring and summer use of seabirds. These data show that the Kaigani Haida, the Tlingit, and their ancestors have been harvesting seabirds during the spring and summer over the last 1,600 years. I hope that these data will be useful to wildlife managers, particularly to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Alaska Migratory Bird Co-Management Council, who may benefit from understanding that Alaska natives of southeast Alaska have been relying on seabirds for a minimum of 16 centuries. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge those individuals and organizations with whom they're affiliated who have made this work possible. And this includes Tony Christensen of the Heidelberg Cooperative Association, the elders Robert Sanderson, Charles Nat Kong, Alma Cook, Claude Morrison, Woodrow Morrison, Anna Peel, and Bob Peel in Heidelberg. I'd like to acknowledge my colleague Stephen Langdon from the University of Alaska Anchorage, Deborah Corbett from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Mike McKimmons and his crew who made it possible for us to get on the island in 2005. Also the Kloak Cooperative Association and the Craig Community Association who approved of the permits that I applied for to do this work. Robert Fawcett from the Burke Museum who made some of the seabird comparative specimens available to me to supplement our collection at the University of Oregon. Pam Edzweg at the U of O Museum of Natural and Cultural History, who provided me access to the bird eggs, or the eggshells, and also to Terry Fifield from the Craig Ranger District for his help with consultation. And with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, biologists Ken Pitcher, Lori Jameson, and Eric Shane, who made possible the work in 2004. Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Terry Fifield, and he's going to show a film, Inclusive Archaeology, Research and Partnerships at On Your Knees Cave.
Ancient humans once lived on this island along the coast of southeast Alaska. Today, native peoples and scientists are working together to explore the legacy of early life that was recently discovered on a cave on the island. Human remains recovered from the cave are the oldest ever found in northern North America. Their discovery has inspired a remarkable alliance among native tribes, scientists, and federal agencies.
The project itself was a paleontological project in its earliest stages, and when Tim Heaton was working at the cave in 1996 in his third field season, and right towards the end of his project, on the 4th of July of 1996, he discovered the human remains in a portion of a rear chamber of the cave that he had just decided to take one last look in before he closed up for the season. And when he got these bones that he had recovered out and cleaned them off in the light outside the cave, he realized that he had some human remains. And at that point he stopped excavation, ceased his project, and contacted me.
Fifield immediately helicoptered to the site to meet with Tim Heaton and to examine what he had found.
Let's see, where shall we place the log? And this is the room we call the second room of the Bear Passage. And it's the room where we found the human remains, and where we also found the very first bear fossils, and where a lot of our best stuff has come from. The room used to be up to about this level with sediment. When I first entered it, a stream began down in this area, but it was right about here where a bear femur was eroding out. And when we dated it, it dated at 35,000 years. It showed it was much older than anything we'd been working with before. So in 1996, when we first started excavating, Fred Grady and I, we started excavating up this way through this kind of the stream bed. And it was when we reached the corner up here that we came upon the human remains.
As the Forest Service archaeologist for this district, I took possession of those human remains and began the process under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. The following morning, I called the tribal presidents of the Craig and Klowok tribes and notified them of the discovery, and then set up meetings during the next week.
With help from the NAGPRA coordinator for the Tlingit and Haida Central Council, Fifield scheduled a meeting in Klowok with representatives of the Klowok, Craig, and Cape tribal governments. This meeting initiated the consultation phase, which is a different process than notification.
Consultation involves asking the potentially affected tribes how they think we should proceed with this situation. Should we allow study? Should we stop now and rebury the remains? Or what would they like to see done? At that point, the Forest Service is required to consult. They're not necessarily required to do what the tribes want them to do, but they're required to consult and to weigh that information in the decision that they make.
One of the things that people, especially in the Tlingit world, say that we shouldn't do is to excavate where our people might be buried. And we have a lot of things happening in our world today. And when I heard discoveries of caves and finding human remains, I had a lot of mixed feelings about them.
Our first feeling is no, because we're taught respect. You don't dig up graves.
In preparation for the meeting, Fifield contacted Jim Dixon, an archaeologist who had worked on the question of early humans in Southeast Alaska. Dr. Dixon offered the facilities at the Denver Museum of Natural History to study the remains and to develop a plan for future excavations in collaboration with the tribes. Fifield presented this proposal at the meeting.
And one thing about the debate at the tribal council meeting, when we first talked about what to do, there certainly wasn't a unanimous decision that we should study the bones. There were 2 or 3 people that stood up and said, no, we should bring them right back and return them to the ground. But more people stood up and said, we need to know something about this person. We need to know who he was. We need to know, where he might have come from and how he lived, and something about him and how he is related to us, and either in lifestyle or in ancestry. And so they were not at all convinced that they knew who this person was. They wanted to know more about it. And I think it's that curiosity from the traditional point of view linked with the curiosity from the scientific point of view that really drives this project and links the agencies, the scientists, and the tribal interests together.
Because of the respect for someone that has passed on, as a rule, that wouldn't be, the gravesite wouldn't be touched. But we've had to weigh the pros and cons. I have to say that there were some folks who were not happy with the archaeological work, the scientific investigation, the intrusive investigation, but by and large, most of our people, at least as I heard the people talk at this clan leaders historical sites workshop, that they were very happy that the work was going forward. And actually we were trying to figure out how are we going to develop this process. We want a formalized memorandum of agreement or understanding as to how we are going to work together, or what we are going to do when new archaeological sites are discovered. However, I should note that in no way will Native people allow for the disturbance of their spiritual and sacred sites. And those are primarily those that are associated with shaman graves and shaman burials. Those sites we absolutely do not want to have disturbed, nor do we want to have any archaeological or scientific investigations of those sites. My main interest in the whole thing is for historical reasons and to find out how long, humans have lived here. And to me, it's part of history. And it's exciting that it's happened here on Prince of Wales Island in Alaska, and we have Alaskan people involved in the process, and so it's pretty exciting.
The tribes and the scientists agreed to work together to study the remains and conduct further excavations at the cave. The basis of this partnership was consultation and community involvement. If the site turned out to be a burial ground, the Klawak Tribal Council stipulated that the archaeologists would cease work and return to the tribe for further consultation.
This is one of the more important archaeological sites found in North America in recent years. Its significance rests in the fact that it has the oldest human remains ever discovered in Alaska and Canada. The human remains are not a deliberate human burial, but rather scattered bones of an individual. And many of the bones have puncture marks in them, which suggests that they've been modified by carnivores. In other words, this individual may not have died in the cave or been buried in the cave, but possibly dragged into the cave by scavengers. He may have been killed in the cave in a hunting incident with bears. Who knows? We just don't know. But the few bones that remain are very important and tell us a lot scientifically.
His teeth were in excellent condition. We can determine his age because the wisdom teeth are just erupting. This one has actually erupted and made contact with the upper jaw and just slightly worn. This one has not made contact with the upper teeth yet. So we know that this is a individual in his early 20s. We also have found the pelvis, part of the pelvis to this individual, and it clearly indicates that he was a male. So we know that these are the remains of a young man in his early 20s who lived on Prince of Wales Island, Alaska, about 9,200 years ago. The reason we know his age is that the mandible was originally found in two fragments. It was broken in half. It's been reconstructed here. It was broken right along this line right here. And with a very small drill, like a dentist drill, we were able to drill into the bone and take a very small amount of bone, probably no more organic material that might be removed from your teeth if the dentist were drilling your teeth.
The radiocarbon dates had to be adjusted to represent calendar years. Applying a set of standard corrections and calibrations, the scientists determined that the young man had actually lived around 10,300 years ago.
I guess most of the archaeological work that's been done here in Southeast, or at least I call it the early literature, talks about Tlingit people being here for just a couple thousand years. And this find on Prince of Wales Island certainly confirmed that Native people were here much longer than that 9,000, 10,000 years ago. And that certainly they were also adapted to the coastal life.
This new information about maritime adaptation at the end of the last ice age was revealed by further analysis of the remains.
We were able to do isotope analysis on the bone, and this clearly demonstrated that this young man was raised on marine foods. In fact, his isotopic signature is similar to that of ring seals, whales, ocean fish. In other words, this young man was totally adapted to a maritime economy. He was raised on seafood.
His seafood diet, fish, shellfish, and marine mammals, shows that he was fully adapted to the ocean. At the same time, 10,000-year-old stone tools discovered in the cave deepen our understanding of the maritime capabilities of his culture.
We have several periods of time when people have lived in a cave, but at this point in time, we find these microblades made out of obsidian. We also have some made out of quartz crystal, exotic rock types that don't occur on that island today.
This is very important because it demonstrates that humans had trade routes or access to these far-flung sources of stone at this very early date. The obsidian, for example, comes from another island called Sumez Island, as well as the mainland of British Columbia at a source called Mount Eziza. The significance of the human's diet, as well as the far-flung source materials for the obsidian, clearly indicate that people had watercraft at this time. They had established trade routes, were making their living from the sea, and were skilled intercoastal navigators. This type of adaptation to the environment, particularly an environment as rich and complex as the northwest coast of North America, indicates that people must have been here much longer. In other words, to develop trade routes, settlement patterns, and subsistence patterns, this complex doesn't happen overnight, and people probably lived in this region much longer. In other words, the individual that we found preserved in this cave is probably the descendant of people that have lived in this area for many years prior to that time.
All through the Indian legends of our history, our people moved on the ocean. Then they traveled the coast and went down perhaps as far as San Francisco on these canoes from Alaska. Our people were a seafaring people. We lived off the ocean. We ate everything the ocean had to provide for our people.
Each clan has a unique history of its origin and migration along the northwest coast. Many of the stories describe events related to ice and periods of glaciation. How far back in time the histories go is unknown. What is known is that these stories parallel the evidence that is emerging from the new science.
Much can be gained by incorporating local oral history with archaeological data. Both sources of information can really enhance each other and create a more holistic picture of the past. For example, the oral history of the Tlingit people refer to periods of rising sea level, retreating glaciers, this sort of thing. And these kinds of data are preserved and documented archaeologically.
After the last ice age, my family, according to our history, ended up in Canada and stayed down there maybe for hundreds of years. And one day, the people decided they needed to move back home. And so they started their migration north from Canada, and they ended up at Tree Point, and I don't know how long they stayed there south of Ketchikan, a place called Cape Fox. And from there they ended up again on Annette Island, and then they moved forward again, and they moved to Union Bay, all through Clarence Straits, and ended up on the north end of Prince of Wales Island, and they stayed in Red Bay for the longest time. They always kept the story alive of where we came from in KQ Straits on the west side of Kupreanof Island.
The fact that these oral histories preserve this information in such vivid detail and clear detail strongly suggests that there's a direct link between the people living in the region today and the people that lived here thousands of years ago. What this means in terms of human colonization is that there's an alternative hypothesis now that's very viable for the first colonization of North America. In other words, humans could have come along the west coast of the Americas, or actually along the southern margin of the Bering Land Bridge from Asia, along the west coast of the Americas, colonizing and settling in these unglaciated pockets and refugia, slowly working their way southward until they entered the more southern latitudes of North America. This is known to most of us as the coastal migration hypothesis.
The young man found in the cave belonged to an ancient maritime culture that lived along the North Pacific coast at the end of the last ice age. This sophisticated sea adaptation was more like the complex Northwest Coast cultures of today than scientists ever imagined. In an era when the goals of scientists often clash with native interests, why did this partnership work?
The success of the consultation in this case can be attributed to both the Forest Service and the Tlingit people themselves. The Forest Service acted immediately after they had discovered the human remains in terms of starting the consultation process. And then secondly, they acknowledged that they were dealing with sovereign tribal entities. And so I thought they proceeded in a very respectful manner rather than in the adversarial relationships that I've seen characterizing other consultation processes.
The Tlingit, whose highly structured social organization is based on moieties and clans, have a long history of dealing with government officials on their own terms. This historical political expertise greatly facilitated the consultation process.
Given this setting here in this small community where I was going to go and talk to people that I already knew in some ways, I knew we would be friendly and professional about how we dealt with it.
If you hear a land manager say, we're going to begin an activity or a project, or there's going to be some scientific data investigation, or we're thinking of issuing a permit, and you hear them mention the names of the people that they think they better talk to, now you're listening to a land manager who is in touch with the tribes, who's in touch with all the people who may have an interest. That individual knows what they need to do, and it's probably a very satisfying experience to work with that person and for that person to work with the tribes, because it bespeaks of an ongoing trust and a relationship that's built over time, a good relationship.
The research team kept the tribal governments informed about the project. This enabled the native communities to be involved in the decision-making process.
One of the things that we've tried to do as scientists working at this site is to share the information that we have been able to obtain with the local people. And I think this is a very important aspect of the partnership and the trust that's been developed over the years. Specifically, the tribal governments have requested that we share scientific discoveries, information, radiocarbon dates, and the results of our work with them prior to sharing it with the rest of the world. Some colleagues have suggested this is censorship or unnecessary restrictions on our research. I don't believe it is. I believe this is a very clear case of cooperation and respect, and just good behavior between peoples. In other words, sharing the data locally before you share it nationally.
I think the stereotype is that archaeologists typically come in, dig things up, and take them home with them, and nobody ever knows what happened or what was found. And that's an especially sensitive situation for Native Americans, whose ancestors are being excavated. So what they wanted was to make sure that that didn't happen. They wanted to know what was going on throughout the life of the project and to be involved in the decisions and the information sharing that was part of the project too.
Another way the communities were involved was by bringing interns in to help with the excavations. First proposed by the scientists and funded by the National Science Foundation and SeaAlaska Corporation, the internship program brought together the educational goals of the local communities, native tribes, and the archaeologists.
I think that the internship program is fantastic. Number one, because we have Alaska Natives or Alaskan people that are actually going in and digging and being involved in the process, and hopefully they're going to want to continue their education in archaeology.
I'm a social studies teacher at Ketchikan High School, and to hear what's been going on in some of the different theories that are popping up and the work that's being done out here and how that may change the other theories that are out there was really exciting, because then I can take that back into the classroom and share with them that our books are being changed, and in their lifetime they will see that happen.
Well, when I first went out to the site, or even before I went out to the site, I was real nervous about the whole project, the whole idea of digging up bones, and that really was awkward for me until I started talking to some of the elders that were in the community, and they really encouraged me to go ahead and study it and go out and participate with the project in the interest of what we could learn and how it can be applied to today's society.
The Native interns struggled to integrate their traditional beliefs with the world of science.
To have the opportunity to work here seemed, as a professional, an exciting opportunity, but at the same time I think I had ignored how I really felt as an American native here. I didn't resolve that in my mind before I came out, and when some of those bear bones were uncovered and we weren't sure if they were bear or human, really scared me, because of the spirituality that we have as natives from this area. And so I think that's, it bothered me enough to when we had our R&R, I did talk to some people to have them give me their perspectives on how they see this particular project, and to calm any fears that I had. And everybody was very positive about it and said go for it. And I think Yarrow, who's the Sealaska intern out here this summer, who's also a Tlingit Indian, but from Klawock, I think put it very well. She said, Linda, I'm looking at it as my great-great-great-great-uncle still teaching me, which happens in the Tlingit culture, is you learn things from your uncle. So that was a neat way of hearing it. And then to talk to some of the people in Klawock who said, this just verifies that there were people here thousands of years ago, because there are still groups of people out there who refuse to acknowledge that the different native groups existed. And we're not saying that these are Tlingits or Haidas or anybody else. It just says there were people here, and the native peoples here are saying we've been here a long time.
After I got out there and started working with the scientists, it really opened my eyes to a new way of thinking in terms of my own history and studying that. It's really important to my people to know where they come from, and our stories say that we've lived in this area since time immemorial, and now the rest of the world is starting to realize that maybe that's true.
The Tlingits have supported scientific research, and in doing this they are unlike many other Native Americans who don't support scientific research of human remains. And I would say that the basis of this support comes from the Tlingit worldview associated with Hashukun or Hashuka. And under this belief, the Tlingits believe that they have very strong bonds with their ancestors and also with future generations. And so when a discovery is made, their assumption is that they're going to support scientific research because they believe that their ancestors are going to be providing them with additional knowledge.
From the study of the ancient past at the small Alaskan cave came not only insights into the very early human history of the Pacific Northwest, but also a new understanding of the lifeways of these early people, their deep connection with the sea and a maritime way of life. A sense of partnership and collaboration was fostered and sustained through open and meaningful dialogue between the tribes and the research team. Community involvement in the project enhanced the cooperative process. Positive personal relationships developed and scientists participated in community events. The partners learned to understand and value each other's points of view.
Sit Tlein showat ayahat.
Native interns were invited to make presentations of their perspectives at professional meetings. Through respect and cooperation, everyone has gained new insights and knowledge about the history of Southeast Alaska and North America.
We're in a world where our existence 10,000 years ago on this land is always in question. Somebody always stands up and says, I don't believe you folks. And yet, I find that these archaeological explorations that are taking place, and the Forest Service is helping us greatly in this area. It's dating our people's existence properly in this country. And we need these kinds of information from our ancestors, even though they aren't physically speaking, but they really are giving us a message that they were here. And I come to the conclusion that we need to find these kinds of old places where people lived. And if we can carbon date the existence of our people, we find that we were here way more than 10,000 years ago.
So now I'll introduce myself. I'm Terry Fifield. I'm a Forest Service archaeologist for Prince of Wales Island, and I've been down on Prince of Wales Island about, I guess this will be my 14th summer, and it has really been my privilege to be part of this project that began on July 5th for me, 1996, and started this relationship building and partnership that's led to some of the most important work into the early occupation of the Northwest coast that has gone on in the last few decades. So I would like to, I think the story was pretty much told there. I think just to fill you in on some things that have happened since that, there were mitochondrial DNA studies done on the human remains that have been published recently by Brian Kemp of UC Davis, and he is to summarize, the technical article that's in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology is almost unreadable even to me, and I'm one of the authors, so it's really tough to read. National Geographic summarized it nicely in a recent write-up in their National Geographic Online, and if you Google for Brian Kemp mitochondrial DNA on your knees cave, you will come up with that explanation. And the basic thing is there's pretty strong support in this case for a Native American, for this person being connected to other Native American groups on the west coast of the Americas, both North and South America. So it supports an idea of a coastal migration. And in terms of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, the idea that this person was Native American is supported by the DNA evidence, and that's an important factor. We have in hand a request for transfer of custody of the human remains to the Craig and Klawock tribal governments, supported by Sealaska and Sealaska Heritage. I have written that up with our intent to transfer custody, and that's currently being reviewed by the Forest Service lawyers. So before we publish it, we want to make sure that everybody on board can back it up. So that's where we're at with that. Any quick questions? And